Primetime Politics tonight, Canada is sending more lethal weapons to Ukraine and making it easier for Ukrainians fleeing the war to come to Canada. We'll get the details from Canada's Minister of Immigration, Sean Fraser. The president of the Halifax International Security Forum, Peter Van Praagh, he's just back from Ukraine. We'll get his first-hand account of the battle on the ground and what's at stake for the rest of the world. And our panel of political commentators weighs in on Canada's response to the crisis in Ukraine and the Conservative leadership race. And we'll begin tonight with the latest developments in the crisis in Ukraine and Canada's ongoing response to it. Here are the key developments today. Russian forces have seized the Ukrainian seaport city of Kherson, the first major city to fall during the 8 days of fighting. The Russians continue to bomb major cities throughout Ukraine, destroying government buildings, schools, and apartment blocks. More than 1 million people have now fled the fighting to neighboring countries, and millions more are on the move. Talks continued today between Russian and Ukrainian delegations towards a possible ceasefire, and some progress appears to have been made on establishing humanitarian corridors for Ukrainians trying to flee the country. Canada today announced it will send more lethal weaponry to the Ukrainians, 4,500 rocket launchers, 7,500 hand grenades. Canada is also imposing a 35% tariff on all imports from Russia and Belarus.
As we see the horrific impacts of Putin's aggression, we must continue to remember that our allies and partners are united and that we are going to keep adding to the measures to support Ukraine's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity.
Ruble down 30%, interest rates up to 20%. Fitch and Moody's downgrading Russian debt to junk. The stock exchange closed for the 4th day in a row. This is a significant and direct impact, which is already being felt by every single person in Russia. And that's a really big deal.
Well, the federal government also announced 2 new immigration streams for Ukrainians fleeing the war and hoping to come to Canada. Sean Fraser is Canada's Minister of Immigration. He joins me now. Minister Fraser, good to see you. And I hear you're bouncing back from COVID-19, and I'm glad to hear that as well. And thanks for taking time to speak with me today. Tell me about these 2 new immigration.
A pleasure to be with you.
Okay, tell me about these 2 new immigration streams. What are you doing for Ukrainians who want to come to Canada to escape the war?
So look, today's announcement is a major step in the right direction that's going to help Ukrainians reach Canada in the fastest possible way, and also ensures that it's efficient and safe. So if I can cut to the chase, we've created a new program that's going to allow people to come here by filing a simple application and going through a expedited security screening process for onward travel to Canada. The advantage to the program we've set up is that there's no limit to the number of applications that it can accept. And we've also heard from the Ukrainian-Canadian community that a lot of the people who are seeking to find refuge somewhere don't intend to stay permanently. They want to go home. But there are some who have family in Canada that will want to stay. So the second pathway is a pathway to permanent residency that's going to involve family sponsorship. And that came from a suggestion through the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, who we're working with every step of the way to do everything we can to support them in their time of need.
How many Ukrainians do you expect will want to come here on that temporary basis? You're setting no limits, but do you have some idea of what that number might be?
It's a demand-driven system that we've built, and we don't know what the actual number is going to be because there's a lot of people who are fleeing Ukraine who are entitled to move about throughout Europe. So it's difficult to predict. What we've done to respond to the potential uncertainty in numbers that we expect could result is leverage the same tools that are used for a tourist visa, for example, when we want to be able to scale up when there's more demand, because in normal times that's a good thing for our economy. So we pulled something off the shelf, but we've taken away all of the barriers that would usually limit a person's ability to be admissible to Canada to ensure that we welcome as many as possible, as quick as possible. So we built flexibility into the system to respond to whatever demand we could possibly see.
How quickly will your department be able to bring these people to Canada? I think I heard you say at your news conference today that the new system won't be up and running for 2 more weeks. So how quickly is this going to happen?
So let me just clarify. The new system will be available, we estimate, in 14 days, but we are expediting applications now, and we started on January 19th, went through our entire inventory on every line of business to identify every single file that's attached to a Ukrainian national. Since the beginning of January, there's actually more than 6,100 Ukrainians who have already arrived in Canada, and we expect to continue to see that expedited application process apply for people over the next 2 weeks while we wait for the new streamlined system to come online as well.
Well, so if it's 6,000 since the beginning of January, and given where the crisis is now in Ukraine, one might reasonably anticipate that we could be looking at numbers in the tens of thousands, no?
It certainly could be in the tens of thousands. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But because we're admitting people on a temporary basis and giving them open work permits, these are people who are going to be able to come here and work to support themselves. But they're also not the same stresses on our systems that we deal with when we're admitting new permanent residents who intend to be here for potentially the rest of their lives. It's a really unique circumstance, and it demands a really unique response.
60 other countries have dropped the visa requirements for people fleeing Ukraine, but you're maintaining that visa requirement that will require them to provide biometrics for security purposes and go through a background screening check. Why are you maintaining that?
There's two reasons essentially why we've decided to do that, and that was actually one of the first things that I considered, because my main interest is getting people here as quickly as possible. When I dug in on what a visa waiver would actually require, I discovered pretty quickly that it would demand a regulatory change and also certain renovations to our IT systems for both the Government of Canada and potentially for airlines as well. And the estimated time to complete those changes was between 12 and 14 weeks. And in my view, we don't have 12 to 14 weeks. We have to move as quickly as possible. But on the biometrics issue, it's important to recognize that over the past 8 years, there have been pro-Russian forces in eastern Ukraine and the Donbass that have been fighting. And we want to ensure that the security screening process, when we're welcoming potentially significant numbers of people, gives Canadians peace of mind that we've done a basic diligence to ensure that the people who arrive in Canada are not going to compromise our security interests.
So we have heard lots of stories of Canadians of Ukrainian descent, but many others as well, who are quickly stepping up here to say they'll open their homes to Ukrainians who flee the war. Look, even your mom, I understand, wants to help. What are you hearing?
Yeah, Mom said she'd take 6. And look, that just characterizes the outpouring of support that has made me really proud to be Canadian over the last number of weeks. We've heard from businesses, we've heard from organizations, we've heard from settlement service providers, we've heard from nonprofit organizations, we've heard from other MPs who are saying the same thing about their parents and their neighbors wanting to take people. It's been extraordinary to see this outpouring of support, and it really communicates to me that Canadians appreciate and don't take for granted the fact that we live in a free country, the fact that we get to enjoy democracy, and to see a permanent member of the Security Council launch a war of aggression, completely unnecessary and an unreasonably costly war, both in financial and human terms, is the kind of thing that have inspired Canadians to do the right thing, to welcome the world's most vulnerable, and to make sure that our reputation as a welcoming place is maintained as we respond to this crisis. All
right, so your mom knows how to get right to the top, so she contacted you directly with an offer of help. For people watching, I mean, is there an organized way that people who want to be part of this, who do they contact if they're prepared to take people in?
So we're working right now through a number of different channels. I've had a number of very productive conversations with provincial governments who will presumably be contributing to this sort of organization. The Ukrainian-Canadian Congress wants to play a role, and there's other different organizations, including within the federal government through ESDC, that's looking at coordinating some kind of a response for employers who are looking to hire Ukrainians because they'll be given open work permits. We have a little bit more work left to do to make sure that we streamline the settlement process, the job supports, to make sure that we don't just get people here, but they are set up for success when they arrive. And I imagine we'll have more to say on that in the weeks ahead as we start to see large numbers arriving across our borders. All
right, so stay tuned. Canada's Immigration Minister, Sean Fraser. Good to speak to you, Minister. Thanks for your time tonight.
A pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
This is a moment for us to stand together. This is a moment for us to step up and defend our democracies, the UN Charter, and the principles of the rule of law that we have. We cannot hold back on putting everything forward to hold Vladimir Putin to account, to make sure that he understands that this was a terrible mistake for which he and the Russian people will pay.
The crisis in Ukraine has brought a sharp focus to the debate over the rules-based international order many believe is under attack by Vladimir Putin. The crisis is a test for democracies everywhere, including Canada, and much is riding on how the world responds. Peter Van Praagh is the founder and president of the Halifax International Security Forum. It's an annual gathering of many of the world's foremost decision makers, and you have been able to watch it right here on CPAC over the years. He's also a former senior policy advisor to a Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs. And look, he's done a lot. He's also held a variety of roles with international institutions advancing democracy around the world. He joins me today from Washington. Peter Van Praagh, good to see you. Look, you've just returned from Ukraine. You were there when the Russian invasion started. You went to Ukraine on the eve of the Russian attack to demonstrate your support for that country. What do you want us to know about what you saw there?
Peter, I really appreciate you having me on, and thanks so much. I do think there's a few points that I'd like to make. I went into Ukraine on Wednesday, the day before the Russians started the war. And I went to demonstrate solidarity and support to the Ukrainian government and the democratic Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people. And I had my first meeting was at the president's office with the secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Alexei Danilov, and I was really taken by his quiet, calm confidence. And there was nothing, bravado about it. There was nothing exaggerated about it. But he said to me, the war is going to begin tonight. The Russians are going to attack tonight. He knew in detail where the attacks were going to begin. And he said, they will attack and we will win. And the way he said it gave me a sense of confidence. So I'm not surprised now that the Ukrainians are putting up a fight, the fight that they are. And then later that night, again, the night before the war began, I had dinner with some civil society leaders, and the restaurant was packed. And everybody knew that the war was coming, and yet they were very calmly eating dinner together with their families and friends. And the next day, as I made my way, the bombing started, and I made my way first I went south to the Moldovan border, and then that was closed. I went back up, went west to the Polish border, and all along the way, there were rows and rows of cars, but nobody was honking, nobody was panicking, nobody was driving ahead. Everybody was just following the rules, very respectful of each other, and they knew it. Again, they knew it was coming. And so I do think that there's a calm, quiet, steely resolve amongst the Ukrainian people that I was very proud to witness myself. Yeah, and I do think, the Ukrainians really are putting up a fight.
It's been interesting to watch the response from the rest of the world and wonder how much of the united reaction we are seeing has been due to outrage with Vladimir Putin, although his plans were well telegraphed, versus how much has been due to that fierce and determined response from the Ukrainians.
Yeah, Peter, I think that is the key question here, and I do have an opinion on that. And I think that, sadly, I'm afraid that the West was ready to let Putin maybe take a little bit of more of a slice off Ukraine, maybe build a land bridge between the eastern provinces and Crimea a little bit more than he had, and then maybe go back to business as usual. I'm afraid, we don't know, but I'm afraid that might have been the case. But the Ukrainians were having none of that, and the Ukrainians are putting up a fight, and it is, in my view, it is the Ukrainians' fight and resolve that in turn is giving Canada and the United States and our European partners the resolve as well, the needed resolve to put the needed pressure on Mr. Putin.
What more should the democracies of the world, including Canada, be doing right now?
Okay, well, there's three things, and I think they're very important. Number one, political support, continued political support is very, very important. There's a move now to actually lower the barriers, not lower the barriers, but expedite conversations about bringing Ukraine into the EU, exactly what Mr. Putin does not want. And I think there should be conversations about that, and there should be voices in Europe and supported by Canada and the United States for a more generous embrace from the Europeans. Number two is defensive weapons. They need more and more weapons, and they need to get in, and they need to get in quickly. Canada's doing it, the United States is doing it, now Germany's doing it. Germany, famously was just sending helmets up until a couple of days ago, and now Germany's sending in some serious weaponry, and they need those weapons. And third is money. The Ukrainian economy is going to suffer, and it does need support to prop up Ukrainian currency.
Right.
And those are all things that Canadians should be proud of supporting. Canadians should be proud of supporting those things. There
have been some calls in some quarters, as you know, for more hawkish action. But look, NATO won't go into Ukraine. This war has been left to the Ukrainians to fight, albeit with weaponry and financial support from other countries. But if we stand by and watch Ukraine fall, then what?
We're not going to stand by and watch Ukraine fall. Ukraine's not going to fall. It has the whole world's support behind it. We just need to keep pushing, and we need to make sure that Mr. Putin understands that the West, and not only the West, as you can see the votes at the United Nations Security Council, Russia is all alone now. Russia is all alone, and Ukraine cannot fall, and it won't fall. And the aim now has to be for Mr. Putin to turn around with his tail between his legs, and probably, of course, he's not going to do that. I think that we're going to have to see some serious Russian pressure at home on Mr. Putin. He's already lost thousands and thousands of soldiers. The fact that he's admitted a make-believe number of 500 means that he can't keep it secret anymore. And so those numbers, the actual numbers of young Russian men who have died, is going to put a lot of pressure on Mr. Putin, and that's where you have to keep putting the pressure on him until he's gone.
Okay, Peter Van Praagh, thanks so much for your perspective. Glad you made it into Ukraine, and glad you made it out safely as well, and great to talk to you today. Take care.
Peter, thank you so much for having me on.
And there was a stirring show of solidarity in the House of Commons today when MPs gave a prolonged standing ovation to the chargé d'affaires from the Ukrainian embassy in Canada.
Mr. Andrei Bukovich, chargé d'affaires of the Embassy of the Ukraine of Canada.
Well, I'm joined now by three political commentators. Susan Smith is a Liberal commentator, Kate Harrison is a Conservative commentator, and Danielle Dalzell is an NDP commentator. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Susan, let me start with you. More sanctions from the federal government today against Russia, trade tariffs, and measures to fast-track Ukrainians fleeing the war who want to come to Canada. I want to get a sense of how you'd characterize the way the Canadian government has responded to this crisis so far.
I think they're being firm and swift and practical. They are, in terms of the visa things, they've been responding to the requests that people have been asking for. There's new streamlined visas that still include a security check to make sure pro-Kremlin people can't get in. And they're going to expand the family reunification program. I think that's good. On the sanctions side, a couple of things today, a 35% duty on Belarusian and Russian products. There are over 1,000 Russian executives who have been put on sanctions list. I think that's quite significant. And we've pushed behind the scenes with our NATO allies, other allies, to achieve the blocking of Russia from SWIFT and everything else in terms of financial transactions. So we are doing what we can. We're sending weapons. We're in constant conversation. I think the Prime Minister even spoke to the Ukrainian president yesterday. So I think there's a lot of front of house stuff you see that gets reported on a daily basis, and I think there's a flurry of work that continues behind the scenes to try.
Kate, let me get your assessment, and if you think anything's missing, what is it?
Well, I think this has definitely exposed some vulnerabilities in our military, both in terms of equipment as well as personnel. And you're hearing military, defense, and security experts say as much. I don't want to discount the work that's been done to date around sanctions. And I think that, there's going to be a lot more of a public conversation that is desperately overdue around Canada's support to multinational and multilateral institutions. And it's high time we had that conversation. Canada's contribution to NATO, for example, absolutely is something the government needs to be prepared to talk about and come to the table with it and have dollars to back it up, in addition to the sanctions that have been announced. And I think that today's announcement around expediting refugees, Ukrainian refugees, is a good one. Good to see the lesson learned after what I would say is a failed effort in Afghanistan to bring home as many of those interpreters as we possibly could. So I'm glad the government has learned the lesson from that stint.
Danielle, what's your view?
Well, I just, my heart's with Ukrainian Canadians and folks who are really worried about their loved ones right now. The gravity of this situation can't be overstated. I think we, need to do everything we can to come together in support of Ukrainian people. And this isn't a time for partisanship. And I think most people understand that. Jagmeet Singh has been calling for that immediate waiver on Ukrainians, on visas for Ukrainians fleeing. We saw movement on that today. That was great. I think we need more of that. We need to help Ukrainian people get here and flee this violence as quickly as possible. Over 1 million refugees today, as the UN said. So this is going to be a lot. The entire international community has to rally. And again, on sanctions, I watched Bob Ray on CPAC yesterday talking about the effectiveness of sanctions, targeting Russian oligarchs. Jagmeet Singh is calling for more. The government is doing that. And I think we need to also do everything we can on that front, because it is effective. And really important.
Okay, Kate, let me turn to Kate here. Kate, the House spent the day debating a Conservative motion to condemn Russia's attack on Ukraine, but also calls on the Canadian government to take measures to ensure new natural gas pipelines can be approved and built to Atlantic tidewater so that Canadian energy can displace Russian energy in Europe. That's a position promoted by others, including the Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, by the way. Why is this the right time to revive the pipeline argument when there's a war in Ukraine?
I think there's a good discussion that needs to be had about where Canada is sourcing its natural resources. We had a lot of this same discussion and debate, for example, Peter, when the pandemic hit, in terms of our over-reliance on China, in terms of manufacturing PPE and other equipment and materials that Canadians need. So I think that a lot of people are scratching their heads and wondering why we can't use energy produced in ethical countries and use Canadian energy. And instead be reliant on other countries that are intent to commit, human rights abuses and other things in order to source that energy. So I think that it's a good time to have the conversation around ethical energy resourcing, as well as domestic manufacturing and production, so that we're less reliant on countries that are doing bad things around the world.
What's your view on that, Susan?
Well, first of all, we're not reliant on Russian oil, to be clear. But I think the pipeline discussion is an interesting discussion. I'm not sure politicizing it at the moment is the right thing to do from a tone perspective. I think the government and Parliament is supportive of condemning what's going on in Ukraine, condemning Russian activity. Turning it into a partisan thing at that moment, I don't think is going to go well. Look, there are countries in the world that are dependent on Russian oil and gas. Clearly, the world is thinking, Europe, Germany in particular, is rethinking that and looking at what the other options are. We do have trouble getting oil and natural gas to tidewater. So we have to figure out a way in this country to continue to do it better. There's a pipeline under construction on the West Coast. The East Coast pipeline was more fraught. It had to go through Quebec, and there were people in Quebec who didn't want it. So it is a national conversation we need to continue to have. Okay. We have to be careful about politicizing it at the moment.
What about the timing around this conversation, Danielle? Is this the time to be, reviving the conversation around pipelines?
I mean, I don't think it should be our priority at the moment. It certainly is a concern. Energy security is a concern. The transition to renewable energy is a priority, and we should keep that as one, but I think right now, in response to the Ukraine, we should be supporting Ukrainian people and helping them get to safety in a nonpartisan way.
All right, let me shift our focus here for the last few minutes we have. I want to talk a little bit about the Conservative leadership race. The party's announced the new leader will be chosen September 10th, and that April 19th is the cutoff for candidates to enter the race. One of them could be Jean Charest, the former Progressive Conservative MP and former Liberal Premier of Quebec. He met with about 40 Conservative caucus members last night to test the waters before deciding if he'll seek the leadership. But he did offer sort of a limited vision of what his message will be if he does decide to run. Let's listen to what he had to say quickly.
One thing that I believe to be very important is to have a national Conservative Party that is able to represent every part of Canada. And it's our historical, I mean, that's really our responsibility to be that national political party.
All right, so that was Jean Charest last night. Kate, let me turn to you to start us off on this part here again. Is Jean Charest a candidate who can unite all Conservatives, as he suggests he wants to do?
Well, I think he's going to have to try to sell an authentic and contemporary vision of conservatism. You'll recall, Peter, that when he had his name in the ring just 2 years ago, he had talked quite a bit at that time about how the Conservative Party has changed, and it's changed in a way that's perhaps different than his view of conservatism. I don't think that change has slowed down at all in the last 2 years. If anything, it's accelerated through a COVID lens. So I think that Mr. Charest's challenge is going to be in trying to articulate that he has an authentic, contemporary conservative view for the party of today, not necessarily the parties that he's been a member of in the past.
Danielle, let me hear you on this. What do you think Jean Charest's candidacy might represent? What do you think Canadians should be thinking about if they're paying closer attention to the Conservative Party leadership race?
Well, I think his candidacy is interesting, and I am a New Democrat. I'm not a Conservative, but I think everyone has a dog in this race in the sense that the Conservative Party could go down a pretty scary path, and we've seen flashes of that. Trying to court PPC voters and going towards a more far right, or they could go to a better, more centrist conservative vision of the party, which I think that he represents. There's a lot at stake here. This is, I think there's been a lot at stake with Conservative Party races since 2015, and I wait with bated breath, and I wait with some concern over what the party could become. Okay,
Susan, final word to you here. Jean Charest has been both a Conservative and a Liberal. What do you think of his possible candidacy? And what do you think maybe non-Liberals should watch for? Or sorry, non-Conservatives should watch for?
Well, I think he's very appealing to non-Conservatives, quite frankly. And if the party is smart, I actually do think Jean Charest is someone who can build bridges and rebuild the party across the country, which makes him a bit dangerous for Liberals if that's who the party chooses. I'm not convinced, Kate talked about a contemporary Conservative Party. I'm not sure Jean Charest will be that comfortable in what is a contemporary Conservative Party as it stands in this minute with, Candice Bergen in the House and Pierre Poilievre and some of the others. It's the third leadership race in 5 years. The party is doing something wrong. They have to figure out how to do something right. And that means choosing a leader that will appeal broadly to Canadians, someone who's strong enough to unify, knit the caucus, and pull it in the direction that it needs to go. Whether or not Charest has the capacity to do that, it's whether or not the party wants him.
All right, that's our time for tonight. We'll have guess what? We'll have a chance to cover this, I'm sure, again in this next several months to come. But thank you all for your perspectives tonight. Good to talk to you all. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
That is all for another edition of Primetime Politics. I'm Peter Van Dusen. For all of us at CPAC, thanks for watching. Till next time.